Alright, you primitive screwheads, listen up. See this? This is Army of Darkness. It's not a horror movie. There's nothing scary about it, but you can find it as part of the Evil Dead trilogy, and it would be weird if I didn't review this movie with the others. This is Army of Darkness, also known as Evil Dead 3, also known as Army of Darkness, The Medieval Dead in the UK. And in the opening credits, for some reason, it's listed as Bruce Campbell versus Army of Darkness, so I don't know. Army of Darkness, I'm sticking with that. In this movie, after defeating the Evil Dead in Evil Dead 2, Ash is sent back in time to medieval times because he and the daughter of the scientist who discovered the cabin and the Evil Dead found out there was this great warrior back then who defended everyone from the Deadites, and hey, what do you know? Ash ended up being that warrior. So it's a time travel movie. Ash wants to get back to his own time period, but he also has to defend this castle from the Deadites. A problem that he kind of helps escalate. And from there, it's just nothing but nonstop action, laughs, and I would say scares, but again, this is not really a horror movie. Army of Darkness is probably the only Evil Dead movie to really get big studio attention, because looking at the title of this movie, you wouldn't even guess for a second that it was an Evil Dead movie. They do recap the events of Evil Dead 2. Unlike with Evil Dead 2, though, your experience with watching Army of Darkness is enhanced by watching Evil Dead 2. So I would recommend watching Evil Dead 2 first, but Army of Darkness really is a bizarre movie, because it is a sequel to Evil Dead 2, but it lacks the horror elements that we saw in Evil Dead 2 and the first Evil Dead. It's really interesting that this series would just kind of gain a genre and then lose a genre at the same time. The first Evil Dead was straight up horror. Evil Dead 2 was the perfect horror comedy. Then when you get to Army of Darkness, there's no horror elements in it at all. It's mostly an action comedy, and make no mistake, this is a comedy, and a very silly one. Sometimes the movie goes into Three Stooges level of comedy. It's that goofy. And I know there's a lot of people out there who are not big fans of Army of Darkness just because it is so silly and just over-the-top goofy, but I think a lot of the comedic elements do work. There's a bizarre scene where Ash has to fight miniature versions of himself. That's pretty amusing. There's the scene with two Ashes. One thing that just has me laughing throughout the movie is that a lot of the Deadites, which are pretty much skeletons, have these normal voices. They don't try to give them a dark or creepy voice. They just sound like average guys, and they spute some of the most random lines throughout the entire final battle. The best comedic elements come from Bruce Campbell. Even though Evil Dead 2 brought us the Ash that we all love and that we're all familiar with, Army of Darkness kind of helped perfect the character, because he is straight up an asshole at points, like a lot of the time, but he's also a badass, and sometimes he can be downright incompetent. One of my favorite comedic moments is when he has to go retrieve the Book of the Dead, but he has to say the magic words, Klaatu Verata Nikto, which were words that were spoken in the original The Day the Earth Stood Still. Basically, he has to say the words or else the Deadites will rise again and attack the kingdom. And what's funny is that once he gets the book, he remembers he has to say the words. He puffs up his chest, has a really deep voice, and starts saying the lines, but he forgets. Klaatu Verata Nikto. Klaatu Verata. It's just so funny that this whole kingdom would rely on this one guy from the future who's nothing like them to be their big savior, and he forgets the one important thing he has to do in order to help save them. And the other great thing about this movie is that it is definitely more quotable than Evil Dead 2. You got the great lines in Evil Dead 2 like groovy or swallow this, and while Army of Darkness does have groovy back again, you have great lines like give me some sugar, baby, or well, hello, Mr. Fancy Pants. I got news for you, pal. You ain't leading but two things right now. Jack and shit. And Jack left town. So it's definitely a more quotable movie. It's also a really fast-paced movie. Both the first two Evil Deads had a little bit of a slow pace to build up the horror and suspense. Army of Darkness, though, because it's more of an action comedy, it moves very quickly. It gets to the point. It doesn't really drag out or dedicate time to a lot of bullshit subplots. It gets in and out very quickly. It's just under an hour and a half. There's never a dull moment with Army of Darkness. But are there some bad moments in this movie? Yeah, basically there are. There is a romantic subplot in this movie between Ash and one of the women who lives in the castle, Sheila, and I don't think it works that well. There's really no chemistry between these two characters, and the actress who plays Sheila is actually kind of dull. Embeth Davidtz just is not all that charismatic, especially when you're playing next to Bruce Campbell. Bruce Campbell is literally running circles around her in terms of charisma. However, there is a point where she becomes a part of the Deadites, and then she starts acting all goofy over the top and really shows her charisma. Funny, all it took for her to be charismatic was to be dead, so... Anyway, that subplot just doesn't really work all the time. There are a few points, a few select moments where the comedy is just a bit too much, and it does often take me out of the movie. But that's about it. If you look at this movie as a straight-up action comedy, and if you go into this knowing that some of the comedy is at the Three Stooges level, then you're gonna have a lot of fun with Army of Darkness. I laughed a lot throughout this movie. Most of them were chuckles, some of them were laugh-out-loud moments, but on the whole, it's good, but it's not great. If you compare this to Evil Dead 2, there's no competition. Evil Dead 2 blows Army of Darkness out of the water, but it's definitely worth checking out, especially since, again, it is a very short movie. And that's my review for Army of Darkness. If you're curious on what my thoughts are on the Evil Dead remake that came out in 2013, I actually do like it. It's a remake that actually does something different and unique. There's no Ash throughout the movie. It goes back to being more of a horror movie, and it's very, very effective. There were a few issues I had with it, but I've only seen the movie once, so I'd be hard-pressed to point them out. But it definitely has a lot of great gore in it, and it's a little bit of a deeper story considering that the plot is involving a group of friends who take this girl to try to get her off drugs. So it's definitely one of the better horror remakes that have come out in the past few years. I have not seen Ash vs. the Evil Dead, though. I don't have stars, but I've heard fantastic things about this show. My goal is to try to catch the series on Blu-ray. I know the first 2 seasons are out, and the first season's actually pretty cheap, so when I have the time, I want to go out there, grab the series, and watch them. Maybe I'll do it once the series ends. So once I watch Ash vs. the Evil Dead, I will definitely do a review on them and give you my thoughts. And there you go. That's my thoughts on the Evil Dead trilogy, and that wraps up my whole week-long review of horror movies. Next week's retro review will be going into the Joel Schumacher era of Batman, so I'm dreading it, but I'm also looking forward to it because they could be really fun reviews. So until next week, I hope you enjoyed this review. Leave a comment down below and tell me what your thoughts are on Army of Darkness. What's your favorite Evil Dead movie? So until next time, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you there's only one.